Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Bid Breakfast. Morning, Rob.
Good morning from sunny Australia.
It's good that it's sunny because you're going to be very busy today whilst I sit back and have an armchair ride because
Yeah.
today's topic is social value, which is one of your many vices and things that keeps you out of trouble. So today, for those people that have joined us live and for those that watch it back as well, so a few things that Rob's just going to talk through. First of all, we are going to define what social value is. And that will mean many things to different people, but we will just give you a view on that today. Then we'll go into the new social value model, and there's a few things that have changed, and there's been some updates which Rob will talk you through. Then we'll go into the politics because Rob's here and everything revolves around politics and behind the policy. Then why that matters, the marks and the risks around that. We'll give you some examples of social value commitments, and then we'll just close off with some governance around social value and what that looks like. So hopefully that will be of interest to people. Without further ado, let's get into what social value is. Now, we found this quote a long time ago when we first started to research social value and it came around. And we were trying to define a way or what it was to people because it was new. It was sort of, is it just more for less? And this was probably the best example of what we found. So this was from the Public Services Social Value Act 2012, a brief guide. So if you want to have a look at that, it is a quite helpful document. It's a bit old now, but it's still worth a read. So social value is a way of thinking about scarce resources or how scarce resources are allocated and used, which is essentially just economics. But it's a slightly different take on that. So it involves looking at the price of each individual contract and looking at what the collective benefit to a community is when a public body chooses to award the contract. And I think that's the key there, is talking about community and how local it is. And Rob will cover local and hyperlocal shortly. So social value asks the question, if £1 is spent on the delivery of services, can that same pound be used to also produce a wider benefit to the community? And I think that's probably the most simple form of what that's about. So hopefully that's cleared up a few things. If you aren't sure about what it is, it's a very simple way of introducing what Rob's going to talk about now. So Rob, here is
Yes.
the stage.
It's a lot of legislation. Yeah, because I think, social value, as I said, there's the Public Services Social Value Act 2012. And I remember when it first came in, and you probably remember as well, Matt, it was quite haphazard. Some councils and NHS were kind of doing it before, kind of seeing which way the wind was blowing. But even after the act came out, it was still a bit all over the place. As you can see there, the summary, a duty to consider around social value, no necessary obligation. There were some almost self-imposed rules around it must be at least 10% of the marks, which we started to see more and more as the years went by. That is more set in stone now, as you'll see a bit further down. But the Public Services Social Value Act is still relevant. It is almost the base for how everything has then been built upon eventually, many years later. God, that makes me feel old, just seeing those years there. We had the Procurement Act 2023, although it didn't go live until last year. It doesn't mention social value by name, or it does, but very, very briefly. It's not really about that. But the change here that's relevant is we've gone from MEET, most economically advantageous tender, to public procurement should be MAT, not this MAT here, but the most advantageous tender, which is quite an interesting distinction now, rather than it being, I suppose, best value for money, which I suppose is how we would have interpreted MEET in the past. It's more what's most advantageous, and social value does come in to that advantageous element. The other element on there is there are mandatory KPIs on contracts above 5 million, which can include social value. Now, I'll get onto this a little bit later, but if you don't meet your KPIs under the new Procurement Act, you could end up on the debarment list. So there's a point here that if you do make social value commitments or commit to certain KPIs around it, make sure you can deliver on them, or you can find yourself in a whole world of trouble. In the past, I might be being a bit unfair to some public bodies, but it felt like social value, well, didn't really matter if you didn't deliver. You know, it was more a box ticking exercise. Now it's a slightly different game. They have to do it, and you've got to do it properly as well. In line with the Procurement Act going live last year, there was also the National Procurement Policy Statement, which means that authorities have to have social value as part of what they do. Now, that's both in terms of how they procure things, but they also need social value plans themselves as well. They have social value to deliver at their end, which procurement can contribute to. You're almost, as a supplier, contributing to that public body's social value plan. We then had PPN 002 and the new social value model, which again came out around the same time, which was mandatory from last October. We will get into the details of that further down the line, but it is a minimum of 10% weighting still, but we do see that higher. I think, Matt, the highest I've seen, it's around 40%. And I think I've heard people say it's even higher than that at times. The numbering slightly out of sequence, but this is more around importance. We've then got PPN 001, where there are spend targets with SMEs for public bodies, which came into effect from April last year, and VCSE spending targets from April this year as well. So it's a lot of the things are moving towards more social value, and in theory, better for SME and VCSE bidders, although we don't always see that. Anyway, I won't go into that. Wales and Scotland are a whole different world. Well, I'm not going to go into detail on those today because we do not have enough time, but there's the Social Partnership and Public Procurement Act in Wales, which went live in March this year. If you are bidding in Wales, have a look at that. Scotland has its own way of doing things as well. Again, look up exactly what you've got to do there. And if you're bidding across the entire set of nations, then you need to know what works in different areas. Okay. So the new social value model, this is probably the most important part of this bid breakfast today. Now, this is mainly for councils, mainly for departments, and it can be used by any public sector body. Public sector bodies can still use the social value portal and TOMs associated with that, but in terms of what I've seen, there is a bit less of that. We are not going to cover the social value portal and TOMs today. We've covered it in other times, and we can cover that again at another point. But the new social value model is quite interesting. The old one was a lot about COVID, about recovering from COVID and getting the country back on track from that. That's now been superseded by this, where we have 5 missions, the big ones in blue here, and it's a lot more about the economy. Kickstart economic growth is probably the biggest and most important one. The new social value model wants you to create jobs, skills, resilient supply chains. Those are the biggest things under social value that it's looking for. Make Britain a clean energy superpower. Well, environmental's always been quite important, but that is clearly set in stone there. One of the newest ones is take back our streets, reducing crime through community cohesion and awareness. Now, I haven't had to write anything specifically to this point of the new social value model yet, but I imagine you could be quite creative here, maybe, I don't know, supporting a neighbourhood watch, for example, or helping out with local groups that are already in place, maybe looking at things around antisocial behaviour. Breaking down barriers to opportunity, which I think has a bit of a link to the economic growth. Employment and training, a big one, helping particularly underrepresented groups getting back to work or getting into work in the first place. And a pipeline of opportunity, particularly with regards to jobs for underrepresented groups. That was pretty much in the last social value model as well. Very interesting one is build an NHS fit for the future. And that's not just for NHS organisations bidding. Any public sector body can put this as one of their priorities in their social value questions. So what can you contribute? Can you be supporting maybe a mental wellbeing charity in the local area, for example? So there is a bit more of a shift, and I think a bit more clarity now around the new social value model, whereas the previous one, I don't think it was particularly well written. It was quite ambiguous. This one has very clear targets about what it's wanting to do. Any thoughts on that, Matt, just as I take a slight gulp of water?
I definitely think the building an NHS for the future is an interesting one. Bearing in mind all the things that we've seen over the last 20 or 30 years with the NHS, and potentially some of the stuff that Andy Burnham was talking about yesterday and the links to social care. So I think if anybody cracks that, they will be in a very strong position to score maximum marks if that appears in any bid that they're responding to.
I think most of the time, because also this is a menu for public sector bodies to choose from when they're doing procurement. They don't have to put all of these 5 in. The one I'm seeing the most is number 1. It's the easiest. Number 1 and number 4. It's probably more specialised when you're looking at maybe at 3 and 5. 2 often comes in around the environmental. Let's just move on. So the politics, I've kind of covered quite a bit of this already in terms of looking at those outcomes. But growth, it's all about growth. It's all about improving jobs, skills. And I think that's something really to keep in mind if you're bidding into the public sector is how can you create jobs? How can you train people? How can you provide skills? And that's not even necessarily linked to exactly what you're delivering. How much more can you do for that local area? You know, could you have internships? Could you fund a scholarship? You know, could you help people to be apprentices? You know, there's all sorts of creative ways you can look at that. A lot of this is confirmed by March 2026, where the Cabinet Office had its response to growing British industry. Again, it's all about jobs and skills, and again, confirming that 10% weighting for social value. They are really hammering that home, and also saying you should have at least 1 published social value KPI for contracts above 5 million. I think that's a good thing, personally, and I think that means that both public bodies and suppliers will no longer just be paying lip service to that. They actually have to deliver, and hopefully we actually see some benefits to that in local communities. I've talked about the enforcement as well. If you do not perform, if you do not meet those targets, you could have some serious issues. You know, the debarment list from procurement is almost the ultimate sanction on this. If you're consistently not doing what you said you do, or even having your contract terminated. So social value can form part of that. It's not that you're just not delivering the core element of the contract, it can be social value as well. Local beats national. Okay, this is a bit different, for example, when you're bidding maybe directly for a department where it's a bit more ambiguous about where delivery is, or if you're doing IT support maybe for a department or an organisation across multiple areas. But if you take a council or an NHS trust or a commissioner, you need to be looking at specifically what you can do for those areas. Saying, that, you're headquartered in London, oh great, you have some interns come into your office in London, but you're bidding for a contract in Cumbria. Well, those interns in your office in London aren't gonna look fantastic as a social value commitment versus what, for example, Cumbria Council. Is there even a Cumbria Council? We're going to roll with it anyway. It's probably been broken up. But you need to be looking at what you can do for that local area, for those local people. And as Matt had put at the beginning, is that £1 being spent on the contract. What can that £1 be given back to the community and that actual local community? Also remember, if you're employing a local person, they're probably spending a lot of their money in the local area as well. It's giving extra benefit. It's almost compounding economic benefits to that area. So look at local plans, look at local charities. Most areas have VCSFE groupings or umbrella organisations that you can talk to with charities and other voluntary sector organisations you could potentially look to support. And generally look to support a local voluntary organisation, if that fits with what you're doing for social value, not a national charity. that may just be doing a blanket set of very good work, but it doesn't go for that hyper-local element we're looking at. Another thing to consider, and we've touched upon this a few times over the last few months, is that the political world has slightly changed, particularly at council level. Now, there were differences between Lib Dems, Conservatives and Labour, but we didn't really see that very much in terms of social value priorities. We now have parties that are more radical, I would say, in terms of some of what they're looking at. And I don't take a position on what's good or bad here, I hasten to add. But a Green Council is going to have very different priorities to a Reform Council. I mean, that's quite obvious. A Green Council does and will have more environmental and probably SME-focused priorities. And that will fall through into its social value. And I think we'll probably see more of this over the coming years as more councils have gone under Green and Reform control. On the other side, for Reform, in some areas, they have dumbed down environmental targets. Now, I don't think we've done a bid to a Reform-led council yet. I'll be very interested to see what their social value says. I would imagine they'd be more looking at things like take back control of our streets, for example. That's a social value priority they'd probably fall in with, and the economic growth element. But that's something that's going to be very interesting to see over the coming years, because some of these councils will be controlled by those parties for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, depending on the cycles. It's never changed. Buyers are under real budget pressure. I don't think that's ever not been the case since I started work, and probably since when you started work as well, Matt. It's all about, can you save money? Can you do something for nothing? And another point on this, I'll probably say it later as well. It doesn't matter whether you believe in doing this or not, about whether you think you should be providing what is in effect extra on top of the specification. If you want to win bids, you've got to do it. 10% minimum weighting can win or lose you a bid. You could have the best quality service, the best price. Someone's matched you and they've given better social value commitments. You've lost. So don't look at it last. Don't pay it lip service. Look at it properly. Do it properly. The last point on here was, well, we've got a new Prime Minister. And Matt, you were saying around the social care priorities he's looking at. I could quite easily see that coming into point 5 around an NHS fit for the future. I could see there being some maybe addendums, maybe some more procurement notices linked to his priorities. So, any thoughts on that, Matt?
I think you touched on something, Rob, which came back to that definition of what social value was, and you mentioned the same pound. And I think that's key to this when people start to think about it, is what can you do for the same pound? Not another pound, the same pound. So when you are planning out services, you might have all the backup infrastructure, you might have IT infrastructure. That is the same pound. So what we've seen with some people is they'll price up their service or product and add on all the other bits and pieces, and they'll say, right, now we need to do social value, so that's going to cost us another 50 grand, and bang that into the pricing model. That isn't essentially what this is supposed to be. So this is the same pound as opposed to adding in extra cost. And I think that's one of the things to really think about here is, what can you do with what you've got that's a little bit extra? And of course, as you've alluded to, Rob, that everybody's always looking for a bit extra, and there's only so much extra you can give. And it is putting a lot of pressure on people in terms of how much extra you can do. And I know, particularly for people we've worked with who have quite a large contract portfolio, trying to go into every local school and deliver a careers talk and do every local thing, it's very, very difficult the bigger you get. So I think the smaller you are, sometimes the easier this is.
I think so. We'll get onto governance in a bit, but I think if you did take it social value seriously, regardless of the size of the organisation, you could build it into your everyday business in a good way. But you do have a good point there.
Yeah, and I think the other thing there is that often people don't realise what they're doing is social values. I know we've worked with lots of people when we ask them, what do you do for social value? Oh, nothing really, we don't know what it is. And then as we start to talk to them about, well, what does your environmental side of things look like? Do you recycle? Oh yeah, we recycle. Do you let your staff volunteer for? Oh yeah, we do that. We give them 4 hours a year for volunteer. Oh, okay. And I think there's a lot of things that people don't necessarily realise they do. So the first thing I would say is understand what schemes qualify for social value, and then look at what you already do, because the chances are you're doing some of this already.
Yeah, definitely. I won't go into this in too much detail. We've already talked about the marks. You can win or lose on social value, and pay attention to the weighting. Talked about meat becoming mat. How that works in practice would be quite interesting. Price still carries weight, regardless of what that says. But in theory, social value carries a little bit more weight than it did before. Outside of bidding, if you do social value well and you show you're doing it and shout about it, that may attract the right people, particularly people younger than middle-aged people like me and Matt. People who maybe I do care about the environment, but the generation below us who are very environmentally and socially conscious, probably more than generations above us. And I've talked about overpromising. You cannot overpromise. You've got to be ambitious, but not overpromise, because if you do win, you've got to deliver it, and you will be held to it. These are just some examples, very small examples of weak versus strong commitments. Me and Matt have reviewed so many bids where we've looked at social value answers, and they don't really say anything. We're going to engage with some local schools. Okay, that's fantastic. Be a bit more specific. I haven't put it here, but you should probably name the schools and colleges you're going to target and say exactly what you're going to do. So example here, you're going to do 6 career sessions a year at 2 colleges. You hope to cover 150 students, and you'll do some supported internships. You've got to give numbers, you've got to give names, you've got to look at it properly and do it properly. Do not do your social value answers last. Okay, it takes real work, real research, and real commitments to do this. And sometimes these social value answers are worth as much as the service model question, but they're being done at the last possible moment, which is madness. So look at them properly. I won't go through all of these, but again, you can see numbers, commitments, names. Governance. Now, again, and this is a bit, might be a bit difficult for smaller organizations out there. But even for the larger organizations, we'll sometimes get blank looks around social value. It's like, well, who looks after it? Dave on the board has named responsibility. What does he do? I don't know. There's a spreadsheet. Okay, that's fantastic. If you've got more than one contract, you should probably look delivering social value, and you intend to do a lot more. You need to get this in order, because if you're being held to this on KPIs on your delivery, you've got to do it properly. You've got to treat it as proper business as usual. So consider who is the best person to lead social value in your organization. If you're big enough, it might be a dedicated role. It might go hand in hand with corporate social responsibility. Some organizations have dedicated teams for that, or maybe it's part of maybe a HR function or something similar. It might be that you don't need a dedicated role and you can split it across other roles. We've seen marketing and communications have this, and I think that's actually a very good fit if they've still got the time to do it. And it may be that somebody in one of those roles is best placed to suit it. It might not be just one person. You might need a team. You might want to consider what we've seen in many places is social value champions in your service areas as well. There'll be local employees who are responsible for social value in that area and are supported by the social value lead. Again, if you're doing a lot of public procurement, if you've got a lot of public sector contracts, have someone with responsibility at board or on your leadership team. And I don't mean just lip service. I don't mean the Dave example earlier. There should be proper reporting up to them, proper looking at what's going on. And where it's not going right, or you're failing, that needs to be get on top of, because again, the ultimate sanction, you could be debarred from the public procurement. So consider having yourself a social value policy, maybe even an organizational plan. What do you want to deliver? What do you want to do as an organization around social value? It's much easier to have that outside of a bid rather than a bid coming along and go, oh my God, what do we do? If you've almost got a menu of things that you want to do, and you can apply that locally with that local research and maybe those local contacts as well, then that's much easier than trying to pluck it out of thin air. And consider, if particularly if the contract's big enough, have an actual delivery plan, maybe even have a retrospective report on what you've done across the year. That's good for commissioners, but that could also be good PR as well. One of the big things for a social value lead is they're going to have to manage stakeholders. Who's going to contact those colleges, charities, whatever they are? You need someone to be doing that. It may be that some of that's delegated to somebody on the ground, but you're going to have somebody managing that. And in some cases, there's going to be contracts signed as part of this. So that's got to be covered off properly as well. You've got to report it properly as well. The easiest thing is a spreadsheet. A spreadsheet is fine if you've got somebody who knows what they're doing and it's being tracked properly. There are other things out there. Some people use the social value portal. It feeds into the TOMS that we talked about earlier. There are plenty of project management systems, but make sure you track it properly and regularly and look at how you're doing. Don't get to bad results too late. And find a good way of handing over what you promised in the bid to the mobilization and delivery teams. Because often mobilization and delivery teams are going to look at social value commitments and go, oh God, have we got to do that as well? So you've got to find the right way of handing that over. It might be a bit of a culture shift as well. And if you've got that social value lead, they're probably going to have to do a lot of the legwork as well. Any thoughts on that, Matt?
Yeah, I think that last point's really important, and that sort of no man's land between bidding to delivery and mobilisation kickoff. There's a huge amount of stuff that gets lost there. So I think that is a really important point of that handover process. I think something else you touched on, which was you mentioned CSR, and quite often CSR and ESG are things that are sort of comparable to social value and transferable. So again, you may already be doing a lot of this stuff, it's just called a different thing. So before you start to create new schemes and employ new people, just have a look inside at what you already do and understand the different terms for these things. I think the other thing, and I think you touched on it, Rob, was we worked with somebody that said, I don't agree with social value. And that creates a real problem then in terms of qualification of opportunity. So they clearly they wanted to bid for the piece of work. That's what they did. But then it came down to social value. And literally in the capture sessions with them, they said, don't agree with this. I'm not doing anything. And we had a very, very long, painful discussion around, if you don't do anything, you're literally just giving away 10% of the marks here. And I think that is really important. And again, you touched on this. Not always, but quite a few of the things that we work on are pass-fail pricing models. So here's 8 million quid. Can you be under 8 million quid pass-fail? Some of them are different, but there's quite a few that we've worked on in the last 2 or 3 years, which are simply, can you get under the envelope? So there are no marks for price, and yet 10% or more for social value. So it is more and more important, even though this is an additional thing that comes outside of the core delivery of the contract. So whilst it might appear to be, sort of over there somewhere is actually quite important in the grand scheme of a bid and being able to win and be successful. So I think it's the more and more you get into it, the less complicated it is. And there are some very quick wins, which I'm sure, given half an hour with somebody, Rob, you could vastly increase their social value capability.
But it rewards creativity and a bit of thinking outside the box. Actually, it's one of the few places you can go, well, it doesn't really matter about the spec. We can think very creatively. So.
And often I think the other thing, Rob, and you've mentioned this many times in bids, is generally it's forward looking. So often there isn't a requirement to provide evidence of what you've done previously. It is all about what you will do. So it is a little
And that's
bit
more the case with social value. A lot more the case with social. Often the marking schemes are different for social value as well. They do not look for evidence of previous delivery. You should probably still have some if you can, but it is almost entirely forward-looking. Just a couple of big opportunities that aren't out yet but will be around medium works, the Education Alliance, which can be, I think it's not just education providers. It's one of those frameworks where any public sector authority or group can get it. Another one of those overlapping frameworks, in theory worth up to 1.8 billion over about 5 years, I think it is. That's coming out 1st of September 2026. So if you're in the response and repairs world and FM, that's one that you might want to look at. I don't know if it's going to be lotted, though. I would expect it would on that level. And if you're into engineering consultancy, then TfL's got a big one coming out in November. 144 million framework for specialist engineering works. There you go. That's us.
Brilliant. We are just over time, so we'll wrap it up there. Next episode of the Bid Breakfast will be the 13th of August. If you're on holiday, enjoy your summer holidays, and we will see you in a fortnight's time.
Cheers.